final segment of the three-part podcast series on reimagining Black boys. This segment tackles the question of why Black boys and youth seem to develop along a different trajectory than that followed by other children. It explains the high prevalence of behavioral and emotional problems that are a consequence of poverty-related adversity, stereotypes, and scapegoating. Indeed, poverty is central. It creates stressors for boys that make it difficult for them to cope. In addition, racial biases set up expectations in adults, teachers, and community people that Black boys are troublesome and troubling, and that these in turn become self-fulfilling prophecies. I end on a hopeful note, suggesting that there are ways that we can make a difference to improve the life of Black boys. I hope that you will find these ideas
Rates at
compelling
which they
and
pass
interesting.
classes, pass state tests, they're about the same in elementary school. But once you hit sixth grade, it drops like a rock. So I think maybe we ought to get rid of middle school. We ought to get rid of middle age, like middle childhood. Let's just snatch that out and let them jump to adolescence. Um, but there's a cumulative impact of these for outcomes later on in life. So whatever changes happen in middle school often dictate the kinds of issues or problems that kids experience later on. So how to explain this? This is disturbing to see this, because it's so consistent across all these data that this middle childhood is problem. Why? And then the only thing in my hypothesis about it is nothing about the emotional and behavioral difficulties of Black boys makes sense except in light of racism, adversity, and material hardship. Now that's a big claim. I'm saying we can't understand it. I can't explain what happens in middle childhood unless we start considering racism, adversity, and material hardship in the lives of these young boys. So how did I come to this? Well, it wasn't easy. The first place was, believe it or not, began here in the University Hospital. I was doing work with families of children with cancer. And I got this big grant, a big grant for me at the time, to study the effects of childhood cancer and sickle cell and hemophilia on children and their families. And I just knew that the kids who had these serious life-threatening illnesses were going to be more depressed, have more difficulty in school, have difficulty in social life. I just knew it. And I was going to use the federal dollars to show it. So we collected a large sample at the Children's Hospital of Michigan and at Mott. We worked with the Hemophilia Foundation and got families there. And by the end of the 3 years that we've done these studies, and so we've looked at socio-emotional development, we did interviews in the family, we looked at academic, and we made one design issue that proved fatal to my idea. We asked them to recommend a friend who was about the same age, living in the same neighborhoods, and we did similar assessments with them. And what did I find? I found that kids with serious chronic illness were no worse off than their peers. So, oh my gosh, I've wasted federal dollars. I'm coming up with no main effect here. What am I going to do? How am I going to get published here? So I thought about it some, and I said, well, look, when I looked at their peers, the peers were having similar difficulties. The peers were being suspended from school. They had high school dropout rates of 40% in Detroit, just like the kids with cancer and sickle cell. So I'm saying, okay, the light went off. Maybe illness isn't the most important thing, because I knew a lesson from sickle cell was the kids who had the worst physical situation weren't the ones who had the most pain. That there wasn't a correlation between other clinical markers and painful episodes. So say there's something else going on here. And I also knew that in working with families of children with sickle cell in Detroit, that they had many other worries. Sickle cell was just one of the few things that they were dealing with. The kids were in schools that were not very good. Um, and so I'm saying, okay, so it's the larger environment. Maybe it's poverty. It's the challenges that they face day to day that are more important, even more important than the serious diagnosis of a chronic illness, of a life-threatening illness. So that was one of the things. The second thing was that a similar effect was found by Arnie Samaroff in studies here and in Chicago, where he was looking at kids with perinatal there were perinatal insults. And he assumed that things would be worse off in terms of their functioning, their emotional adaptation, etc. No difference. The difference came in the set of traumatic experiences, the life stressors. The more life stressors, the more there were difficulties in terms of social functioning. And it was cumulative. And it was almost like it didn't matter what they were, whether it was family separation, incarceration of family members, substance abuse, the counting. If you just counted, you could predict how challenged the behavior of the child might be. And then there was a book. It was a dissertation. I mean, I usually don't read dissertations. But this was a wonderful, it was written by Anne Ferguson. She turned it into a book, and she called it Bad Boys. It was a study of Black boys in Oakland, California. And what she found from her observations was that the school had a role in creating this role of Black boys. They had a special place for them, like when they were, and they were what they call the frequent flyers, the ones who would constantly sit down. They were sent to a room with a black male who was like a police officer, who kept them there. It was their room. And they'd get sent there every once in a while, often frequently. And at the same time, these kids were loving kids, at home, they had a very different reputation than they had at school. They were caring for younger kids. They were loving their parents. And so there were in some ways where the school was creating a role. And the way they defined it, they would point to kids and say, there is a cell in prison with his name on it. And they were talking about kids who were 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And so what was wonderful about it is that she goes into a lot of, I highly recommend the book to you. It's published by the University of Michigan Press. And it really outlines how social environments play a role in creating what we call bad boys. So it was all those things together that really reinforced it. Then on top of, so that accounts for hardship. But there's also the issue of racism, the kind of rampant stereotypes that are attributed to Black boys. What are those? You know them as well as lazy, angry, deceitful, respectful, unintelligent, violent, predatory, hypersexualized, irresponsible. That's how they're seen. That's how they exist in the public imagination. And it starts when they're young. So in this national study, we would go and observe in early childhood programs. So we had interviewers who would go in, there was someone who would come back tearful and saying, like, I can't believe, telling me, I can't believe what I saw in this classroom, how teachers were criticizing, belittling, um, differentiating between the black kids and the white kids in this is preschool. And I saw some of this myself. That's for another day. Um, but there was one that stood out. She said, as soon as she walked into the classroom, there was an interracial classroom, this other little girl comes up to her and points out and says, that's Jamal. He's bad. Before she had a chance to see anything, the girl went, we want you to know, I'm a representative of the class, and I want you to know he is our bad kid in the classroom. And when she watched, she said, well, he was exuberant, but his behavior was really not that much different than the other kids. And so if there was a fight, and the kids got into fights, he was the one seen as being the cause of the problem. He was the one made to sit in the back of the room. He was the one, like all the other little black boys around the country in these early child, they were the ones who were kept in while other kids were allowed to go out and play because their behavior wasn't good. And so there is a kind of, and here's, well, I won't go there. So the point is that there are stereotypes, beliefs, expectations. In one study, a group of teachers were shown a video, 4 kids interacting, black boy, black girl, white boy, white girl. And they were told to rate the behavior, who's problematic in the situation. And of course, the black boys were rated as most problematic, when in fact the behavior was pretty much the same. And so, again, it's this notion of implicit bias, the expectations of teachers that they look for. And if you look for enough bad behavior, you're going to find something. And so they expect and they look for bad behavior. Um, so, so we do the same thing with adults. So I don't know if you recognize these pictures, but they are the City Park Five. You remember a woman who was raped in City Park. I'm sorry, City Park is New Orleans, Central Park. In Central Park, the police didn't have any idea who did it. They happened upon these group of black boys and they did all kinds of things to coerce them into confessions. Newspaper reporter, even our president said they should be put under the jail. No evidence, everyone assumed because of what they look like that they were guilty and that they should be given the most extreme punishment. It was fear and stereotypes that follow many black youth. And so the question is, what I'm claiming is that this existence of racism, the implicit bias that boys confront daily, it's the poverty, the hardship that they confront daily. Not all, but I'm talking about this is a subset that I'm talking about. That my claim then is, how do I explain the behavior? How do I explain the charts of the elevated behavior problem? And the insight that I had was this. So wait, if I look at this chart, one of the things I didn't show you was that by high school, the rates of behavior of black kids, black boys and other becomes this, they come together. The problem is by this time, boys have already developed a reputation as being bad, and so that follows them. But the behavior of white kids, the rates of behavior becomes just as high. So at first when I saw that, there's no difference. I was saying, oh, good, their behavior went down. And no, it was that the white kids began to act out by high school. So, all kinds of things, playing hooky, drug use, school rules, dress code violations, all kinds of things that begin to get them into trouble. Fighting, gossiping, online bullying. So white kids behave. So it wasn't that black kids, boys were better. They're about the same. But that they merged by high school. And so I said, okay, well, physically, what I'm saying is they both reached the same point, but black boys got there earlier. They got there earlier, which means that maybe their development is accelerated. So that's a hypothesis that I'm doing. That's how I'm explaining what's happening to them, that they're developing prematurely, accelerated, um, and that this accelerated development is a consequence or an adaptation to adverse life events, to hardship, to racism, that those things step up the pace of normal development. So it's a different idea. So, well, what evidence do I have? Why would I claim that? What are the things that I could use to support that assumption? Unfortunately, my type is so little. Let me see. Um, so the implicit biases influence how black boys are perceived. The schools misconstrue their behavior through implicit, as they're being problematic. They're defiant. Their willingness to assert themselves make them seem like they're resisting defying authority. The schools respond with harsh exclusionary discipline. So the point, I guess I want to go, is that the prevalence of externalizing behaviors come together. They peak in middle childhood, 9 to 11. And this convergence is the thing that makes me believe that they're accelerated. So how is it now that I can claim that they're growing up fast as a consequence of adversity and racism? First, their family conditions often push them towards independence and self-care. So very early on in life, they're taking care of younger siblings, or told to be independent. So there's an adultification assumption that black boys are often those growing up in single-parent households with their mothers only, told you're going to be the man of the house. So you have to take on that responsibility. They're made to become self-reliant too quickly, I think. And this is the worst part that's underappreciated. In dangerous neighborhoods, they have to provide for their own physical safety because the schools don't, and parents are not there. And so they can't rely on their parents and adults to keep them safe. They have to do that themselves. And finally, they share adult worries. When there are financial issues, when there's fighting and conflict between the mother and partner, they see that. They worry about their younger kid, their younger siblings. And so they're exposed to things and made responsible for things that are probably beyond their maturity level. I remember an example of black kids going to camp. And one of the siblings had a cut or something. And the oldest sibling didn't know how to take care of it. There were lots of basic abilities, like if you get a cut, you go, in the home, you put a little mercurochrome on it when I was a kid, or what is it? Anyway, some of the antiseptic ointments, and you put a Band-Aid on it. Well, they didn't, it's like they missed something in the, they didn't know what to do. And so there are lots of lessons, in a sense, they were pushed to do things before they had the knowledge, skills, and maturity to do it. And what about this? So the role of stress is important in early. So I think, again, this is all hypothesis. I can't say that there are data to prove this for certain. There's some data. Cortisol activity. Well, we know that the more stress, there are some disturbances of cortisol activation. And that, I'm hypothesizing, might lead to early puberty and its associated risks if you're maturing physically early. You're getting the smells, you're getting muscles, you're beginning to look like an adult. And so I have been hypothesizing, and I'd love someone to test this idea, that black boys are getting in trouble more likely to have early onset adrenochy. Um, and that it's these, and it's precipitated by these elevated cortisol levels early on. And we know there are data about early pubertal timing, and this is affecting all kids, but among black kids, that is an especially important issue. And then there's the story of the shorter telomeres. I don't know that, I've read this research, and so it would suggest that, well, so black boys, I say black children in general, have shorter telomeres. And it means that their cellular has premature or early cellular aging. And so then I guess that's another piece of data that would suggest to me that they are maturing more rapidly. Then their social sequelae. They begin to think of themselves as mature. The fact that they're placed in all these situations, maybe they're developing early, and so they see themselves as more mature than they really are. Um, they value autonomy. They want to be independent. They're looking for opportunities to be independent. They question adult authority. They prefer to be in peer-dominated environments. They want to be away from the parent. They don't want to be monitored. They want to be free. And this you see in the younger, in the middle school kids. And they're often attracted. There's a lot of data to suggest that these middle school children, boys, are attracted to older peers and to the freedom that they have. And then finally, there's the loss of innocence. The fact that they're seen as older than they are and treated as older than they are. So all of these social things also push them towards early or accelerated maturation. And so what's the consequence? They're both positive and negative. So the positive ones of this accelerated maturation is that they're often responsible, they're resilient, they have to problem solve, they have to develop pro-social skills. The negative ones are there too. They become disinterested in school. They engage in risky behaviors, things that are exciting. They transverse the law at times. And there's impact on health, that accelerated aging and potential long-term health consequences for their behaviors. Violence, they die early, homicide, etc. So adverse experiences of material hardship impact and distort emotional responses. This is a claim. This is a conclusion I'm coming to. It leads to hypervigilance when there are environments that are unsafe and need to be self-reliant. These are the way that they cope with stress. And adults fail to see this misbehavior as coping responses. They see it in other ways. And so they're not able to really understand why kids are behaving, these young boys are behaving the way they do, that it's their way of adapting to the environmental challenges that they experience. So in summary, my claim is that black boys' behavior might be accounted for by accelerated development that results from systemic stressors. That the coping strategies they develop can be adaptive and in some contexts be maladaptive. And that if we're going to alter the situation for them, we have to do more than one-to-one counseling. That systemic issues or systemic and environmental issues are important. We can't do it all. Many of us who are mental health professionals have our own scope of action, but even within that, there are things that we can do. And so what can we do? What is your responsibility? How can you help Black boys onto a more positive and developmentally advantageous trajectory? And so in order to reclaim or redeem Black boys, we need to have a more humanistic stance towards them that involves unconditional positive regard And I think one of the best examples of this is displayed in the book Tattoos on the Heart by Father Boyle, who runs Homeboys. If you've not read it, if you're working with adolescents and you've not read it, I highly recommend it. He talks about um, radical compassion, um, loving and and uh, compassion for those even in an unconditional way. And so the other obligation is to reimagine them, begin to see them not as not as the unreachable, uh, but to reimagine them as innocent, lovable, and deserving of human compassion. That we have within our wheelhouse. And so, in order to reimagine them, we have to see them as inherently good, inherently needy, inherently vulnerable. We need to implement strategies that slow down their development. Slow it, like we want to make them less mature. Someone said they're already immature. Um, but we want to be able to protect them from some of these stressors that accelerate these developments. We need to provide physical safety and reduce their exposure to violence. They need to feel safe when they come into schools. That means that teachers and school staff need to be down on the floor, seeing and preventing bad things from happening. And we need to teach them adaptive skills for coping. There are going to be stresses in their lives that we can't resolve immediately. But we can teach them emotional coping strategies to help them get through with and minimize the harm that they experience. And so I'll conclude with there are three different things that children, Black boys, need. The first one is caring networks. And this is radical compassion, as Father Boyle talks about it. They need relationships um, that provide emotional support. This goes back to attachment theory, that tells them that they matter, that they're valued, and that they have a source of help in managing stress, that they're not alone. It means physical protection. It means extravagant tenderness. I guess the last thing, you see this scruffy dude who is in your face, to be tender with that dude is often hard, but that's often what they need. One of the things that Father Boyle says that it made me think about my relationship with Daniel was that we see them as needing to be fixed. That's a problem. They don't need to be fixed. They need compassion. They need value. One say, that's the kind of softy approach. But when you read, he's no softy, I can tell you. He's not a pushover. He doesn't tolerate bad behavior. He has high standards. But it's conveying to this, I see what's good about you. And so for me, my problem and my failure with Daniel was not that I didn't know how to teach him how to read. It was that I couldn't see and tell him I saw him. I couldn't tell him that I see you're scared. I see that it's a threat to you to come into this office and to be labeled as something that you're afraid. You don't want people to know you can't read. You don't want to be labeled in that way. And that's what this office experience is all. It's about labeling you, and that's what you refuse to participate in. And I understand that. And if I had been a better therapist, I think I could have worked harder to convey that to him, even if he did not talk to me. And so I would say, as the Jewish wise man says, too soon old, too late smart. That I'm learning. And maybe there are other Daniels that I can deal with differently. And I hope that my words will lead you to deal differently with other Daniels. And so if we could do one thing for kids in school, I would say every child in school should have at least one person they could go to and talk when they're down, when they're ready to hit someone, when they want to give up, when they feel like a failure. One person in school that they can talk to. That's the quality of a good school. If every child can say, yeah, I know who that is. I have my person I can go to. And just recently I started, well, it may be unrealistic to think that in a school of 2,000 kids and 100 staff, so maybe it's going to have to be peers. Maybe we have to develop peers so that they can be that person, so that they're the one who is co-regulating when your friend is out of control, rather than throwing fuel on the fire, oil. You help them to tamp down, calm down, help them know that they're valued and that they're seen. And so they need to be understood, they need to be seen. But the other thing they need is compassionate control structures. So you can't let them run wild. You have 2,000 kids or some 4,000 kids in this one setting. You need to have a structure, and it can't all be a punishment structure. It has to be a guidance structure. This is the kind of community we are at this school, or in this family, or in this neighborhood. These are the things we will support you to do. And if there's not, we're going to correct you. We're not going to reinforce it. We're not going to go along with it. And so it means modeling compassion, sincerity, and seeing, but also setting standards, that expectations. And I always thought in the best classrooms, the teachers didn't have to yell to get kids to listen. She didn't have to criticize. She didn't have to call them out. Some teachers say, I like how Johnny's sitting down. Well, I'm not talking about that. In order to make everyone else sit down. I like how Mary is sitting being quiet. You structure the classroom so that everyone knows what's expected. And you give them cues to do what's expected. And so in a pre-K classroom, kids know they go from one center of activity. Music comes on, they move to another one. Another music comes on, the cleaning music. They know to go get the broom and they start putting things away and cleaning up. The teacher doesn't have to be there saying, okay, you do this. The kids know what's expected and they know that they're valued and contributing to their community because they're doing as expected. Now, occasionally they're going to be the deviant, the hyperactive child. And so you do slightly other things to help to integrate that child. But creating a structure, a control structure, doesn't have to be coercive. It could be something that works best when people accommodate to it, accept it, and embrace it. And as they get older, help to construct it, to construct the rules. Talking to middle school class about what is it, what are the rules you think we need to engage in for us to work and to get along and to work? What are the rules we should set up? And so engaging students in that kind of conversation, I think, can be very, very helpful. Okay. And then the final, and this is the one that I never see schools do. Attain through meaning and purpose. Kids, middle school, adolescents, even adults, need a sense of purpose and meaning that go beyond their material existence. And to convey that through one, valuing their identity, their racial identities, their socioeconomic identity, but also giving them a purpose, giving them a job, involving them in helping others. That's one of the most successful ways to create a kind of positive social competence, is involving kids and helping others, whether it's helping younger students, volunteering in the community, visiting people who are sick. Those things help to build social competence.